Hey, can everybody hear me all right? I am. I am doing a wet palette. Somebody suggested it last week, so I decided to take a look and figure out what the heck was going on with that. And it was super easy to make. Um, it literally is just it's a piece of Tupperware with a couple paper towels wet underneath parchment paper. And it works incredibly well. Super, super surprised me, but it was awesome. I was playing around with it this week, and I used the same paints for 3 days without it drying out, which was amazing. And then I actually went and, for the first time in ever, put some paint in there and started using it, and used all of the paint that was on the palette, which made it stayed wet until the end, which was awesome. So I'm pretty excited. Pretty excited for that to go through. I had to mute myself for a brief second. Push in my keyboard. Things loud. How's everybody doing tonight? So, this evening, my intention is to work on these two guys. Make them look more like these two guys. So I've got a couple of unpainted blitzers and a couple of mostly painted blitzers. So that's what we're gonna do. First thing I need to do is get my dry brush ready. Because while I got the little ink wash done over the bone, I did not go back and do the couple layers of dry brushing that I like. Do the couple layers of dry brushing that I like to do, just to kind of get it up to a nice smooth white with the shadows and such. So that's where I'm going to start. That's where I'm going to start. Let's shake this up a lot. Hopefully we get some more folks on tonight. I don't know if anybody's into Blood Bowl, or if you're just looking to pick up some tricks with painting. But it's a nice evening. Should be pretty chill. And I don't have to put any paints on this anymore. Now, I put it in here. It's actually pretty cool. So that is basically all set. It's a little ridiculous. You get a little tiny dab of water on the brush, even though I'm dry brushing, but I want to show you that it kind of spreads and stays. And I'll show you later on tonight. So this is what it looks like right now. Later on this evening, it'll look very similar. Okay, we're going to get a lot of that paint off, or at least onto paper towel. I'm just going to grab one of these guys. Kind of start lightly going over it with the bone color. It's weird. Dry brushing is a little strange because you actually want it to be, I almost am better off putting it on a regular palette. But what's going to happen is you're going to start seeing it kind of appearing on the mini. Let me try this a little bit. just going to go back and forth. What's going to happen is it's going to kind of rub off a little. It'll start lightening things up, mostly the upraised sections. And that's the intention. And I'm mostly looking to get armor plates with this. So the big old shoulder pads, kind of the edges of those. So it takes a little bit to get practice with dry brushing. Like, strangely enough, it was one of the first things I did. I got a little kit from a hobby shop a couple towns over from where I grew up. And the little kit had basically a knight, sort of a typical knight in it, full armor, very Arthurian looking, not like Victorian and super fancy, but it was like, I painted it like a Black Knight, but it had an embossed shield with a whole bunch of details on it, some other little bits here and there. And what I ended up doing was a lot of dry brushing. And I did a lot of the dry brushing in like a purple metallic, so it looked pretty neat. And I got all the upraised sections and corners and stuff. And that was cool. And it was the first model I ever painted. It was literally like a paint starter kit that said, here is your brush, here is your paints. Got a couple of colors to use on it. So Dad, are you down, you having dinner right now? You and Kayla? Noah's not down there right now, right? Where is he right now? Georgia? I don't know. Someplace else. I'm just going to go over pretty much everything and try and hit all the upraised sections. Now that I've actually got the brush a little bit saturated, it's working a lot better. You're going to start seeing a lot of the upraised bits start getting the bone color. More of a bleached as opposed to the kind of dirty bone color. Doesn't take too long. This actually works kind of nice because it's relatively quick. Just let me know if the sound cuts out or anything weird. I'm trying to pay as much attention to the chat as possible. But I gotta look up from the mini, which means it doesn't necessarily, I gotta make sure that I'm not necessarily doing some detail stuff, which is nice because I'm not doing that right now, so we're okay. But these new Blood Bowl minis are pretty ridiculous. Like, the detail change from old Dark Elf to new Dark Elf is insane. Like I said last time, I had to put the thumb on the Witch Elf, which I thought was a little extreme. Had a little bit of trouble connecting, which was strange. So hopefully it's not laggy or anything weird for anybody who's keeping an eye on me. Just ripping through some of these. Make sure I get all the plates on his legs. I kind of draw along the direction of the armor. You get what I'm talking about? And what it does is it hits all the upraised points and it leaves the cracks. Starts giving some depth to the figure. Not too worried about the pants and stuff that kind of deeper in, because I'll be getting that with different colors later. So. Thanks. I kind of tried to line my palette up in a better spot so that I wasn't, trying to stay in the middle of the palette or up too high off the palette. It's a little weird. The posture is a bit different, so I've got to be kind of careful. Trying not to bend over too far. And just hunch the whole time. All right. So that should be good. That should be good for the armor on this guy. Oh, missed a spot inside that shin guard. I'm bound to screw up at some point and get completely out of camera. All right. So this is the dry brushing stage done on this one. And here's the difference. So it lightens it up quite a bit. And you can kind of see it down on the legs and stuff. Maybe not because of the camera. So now I'll do the second one. Much like when I was talking about doing ink washes and stuff, one of the tricks with dry brushing is to not worry about it all that much. You just kind of have to get in there and get it done, really. All I really want to do is be able to get the upraised areas. And this is essentially going to be almost an undercoat for me here. So I'm not too worried, just trying to get the plates. And then we'll get in there. You can do back and forth, or you can do circles, whichever way you feel comfortable with, and whichever way is covering properly. It also kind of depends on what the details are on the figure. Like, you don't necessarily want to dry brush a flat figure, because you're not going to get any details off of it unless you're trying to add some highlight to like an armor plate, like a standard sort of, cuirass or whatever. That sort of rounded, like this guy's got it kind of on his back, and if I go a little bit of side to side, you can get sort of a metallic texture going on if you've got the right color. Looking to pick up the edges as much as I can. going to get lighter because I'm going to do another layer on top of it. I basically bring them up to white. I'm trying to do this to give it some stages. Almost better for your brush to be a little bit, I don't know, if you do this you start seeing it across your knuckles and not like in the grooves of your fingers. That's the way you want to go. That's what you want it to do. You want it to basically see your fingerprints. This is funny, you guys can't hear it, but Sif is on a pad behind me, snoring. Just bringing the tips of the brush, the bristles, across what it is that you're looking to paint with a dry brush. So what drove me nuts about this team was that on the official roster, you can have 4 blitzers. And in typical GW fashion, the box comes with 2. And because they're reprinting all of the Blood Bowl stuff, there aren't any individuals available. So I can't just get 1 or 2 blitzers. So I had to get another box. So I basically had to figure out a way to get my hands on another box just for the 2 blitzers. And it comes with 12 players. So that was annoying. Rinse this off a bit and try and get it as dry as I can. I grab the white. Thanks, Naff. I adjusted the camera and I did a little bit of a tricky bit with the light so that it's not getting in my face as much, so it's not crazy. Nothing special yet. I just did the first layer of dry brushing on the 2 new Dark Elf Blitzers. However, I do have myself a wet palette now to go with my dry palette. Forget who suggested that last week, but I decided I'd try it out and it's fantastic. So all right, we'll see that it's still wet. It's absolutely fantastic. It's like it's all dried anywhere else on this palette. This is just some matte white. Going to do the same thing. Get the brush pretty soaked in it. Pretty dry. Drag it across my finger. Yeah, you see how it's not? You can get your fingerprint on it like this. When it starts doing that and it picks up your fingerprints, that's what you're looking for. And let's see, am I getting back to the right spot? Just gonna go in with the white. Try and dig around for the upraised sections of the armor plates. Realistically, dry brushing is pretty low stress because you're not really worrying about details or anything. I recommend doing it early in the process because, again, you go back and you paint over anything you've bumped into anywhere else, so really all you gotta do is go nuts with a dry brush. Hit all the ridges, all the upraised ridge sections, any place you want that color highlighted. The wet palette? Is that what you're talking about, Neff? Yeah, I was like looking around for it. I found this guy's video on YouTube and he was like, use these things are amazing. And he was sarcastically saying, you know, they're super hard to find. He's like, no, not really. And then he was like, the best way to do it is to take some paper towels and take a sandwich Tupperware container. You fold up the paper towels so that they fit all in the bottom, nice and snug. And then you go back and you get a piece of parchment paper, like used for, you know, cookie sheets or whatever. And you cut that to the right size. And since parchment paper is porous, what it's doing is it's allowing the water to soak up from underneath and keep the paint damp and moist and not dry out. And it lasts for a really long time. I actually had to change out the parchment paper I was using for tonight because it still had all of the colors that I had used earlier today and earlier this week, and they were still fine. Like, all I really had to do was mix them back up a little bit on the pad, and they were still usable. It was ridiculous. I've been painting for a long time and I had never used one, so I wasn't exactly sure what to make of it. And then, well, I started using it and I don't think I'm ever going to go back. Because my paints don't dry out as I'm using them now. Get all the armor plates. I think so. Move it on to this guy. Again, keep the paintbrush itself kind of, like when it gets tacky, that's what you're looking for. It's not like a super tacky paint, but it's definitely not completely, it's not damp, it's not wet, it's not necessarily going to go on a nice smooth coat. It's going to go on slowly, so it's going to change color slowly as opposed to completely covering the surface you're working on right away in one pass or two passes. And it's only really going to start applying to upraised hard ridges, so that's going to make it stand out, make them stand out a bit more, make them look nicer. Oh yeah, it'll preserve long enough for like a week. And some of the paints might separate a little bit. Um, so like the ones from the tubes that I have, the Army Painter stuff, probably the Vallejo stuff that you guys are graciously providing in exchange to paint the minis for you. Um, since it comes out of a really thin nozzled bottle, that will most likely separate if I leave them there, but I can mix them on the palette. I just take the bristles of the brush and I just spin it around a couple times and blam, it's ready to go. So, all good. I'm really looking forward to it. But yeah, this is really easy to do. It is really, really easy to do. There's a guy, YouTube channel, Tabletop Minions. That's where I found it. I think if you do a Tabletop Minions wet palette search, it should show up. Apparently that particular video of his is getting lots of traffic, or has been getting lots of traffic, so. But it's very straightforward. I mean, he doesn't mix, he doesn't say, I don't know what the word I'm looking for here. He doesn't really beat around the bush. It's a great palette to use. And it's just made out of a sandwich Tupperware container, paper towels, and parchment paper. It's ridiculous. Getting there. Here, get some of the bruised bits over this way. How much different is that going to look? I think the undercoat was a little bit different. Hopefully it's not going to be too much. Dry brushing taken care of. Bits off my dry brush, clean it out. Try and roll it on the edge. Get it in under the water in your cup. Roll it. Get it in here like this. Roll it, and it gets a lot of it off. I don't think I'm going to use the dry brush too much for the rest of the night unless I get to the dragon scale cloak that he's got. So I'll tuck this over here. Next up, doing the skin. The question was, how did I do that? Is it gonna pick me up? There we go. I think I actually used, I don't think I did it with Elf first. I think I actually did it with the Barbarian flesh. So we'll start there. We'll start there. Again, these have the little tiny applicator tip on it. So it's one of those things that I'm going to try and make sure I shake it up really well and get the little paint scab off the tip. All right. I'll try Barbarian flesh and see how it goes. I don't need a whole lot. Just putting in a little dab. I should probably wipe this off. A little dab on the wet palette. I am going to use my detail brush as opposed to my fine detail brush. Get it a little bit wet. Some of the bristles. So I'm working with just this one right here. See these guys? Both still completely wet. And it's been half an hour. I can go back and I can just pick that right up. So if I needed to go back and do some touch-up on something really quick, that's all I would need to do. Okay, so getting back in here, making sure I'm in the right spot. I'll do my best not to hit the armor plates. If I can. Front of his neck. I'm doing the same thing as I've on the regular palette though. I'm still drawing the brush kind of toward me, turning it when I'm picking up the paint to give myself a nice sharp point. Okay. The blitzers I have not wearing gloves. So the tabletop minion guy was saying, when you paint your figures, you want them to be painted, but you want them not to look like they have paint on them. And that's absolutely correct. You want to make sure, that's what I was talking about when I said things are going on smooth. You want it to be nice and smooth, not streaky, because that way it looks natural. It doesn't look like it was applied with toothpaste. It was all thick and gross. And that's what that wet palette is going to help me with. It helps me keep things nice and damp so that they go on smooth. My bristles are getting a little bit spread. I hate to say it, but it might be time for me to get new paintbrushes. I've had these guys for such a long time. But we'll see how the ones that come in the Vallejo box work. And I definitely just got some paint on my hand. Where is the camera? Right down there. So you know I'm actually painting because it's been done. Sacrifice has been made. Yeah. You're not going to be able to see that one very well. I think that's the only part showing on those guys. Yeah, that's the face and the hands. Okay, let me just draw this out a little bit more. Am I in the right spot? If I could figure out how to mount this camera directly above, I should work on that. It would be a better angle to be able to see. But again, you don't have to rush. There's no rushing necessary. You're not in a hurry to get anything done for these. For anybody else, it's just for you most of the time. Just take your time. Don't worry about the mistakes. You can always paint over it. And if you put your paint on nice and smooth, nobody will know. Because there won't be a bunch of bumps. A little bit more water down here in the actual paint itself. Right hand covered. Again, this is kind of like the base coat. Flesh tones are really tricky to do. It took me a very long time to figure them out, and I'm not going to say that I'm a pro at it, but it's all about realizing that if you just do it one color, it's not going to look right. I feel like this detail brush is not doing me any favors. Let's try the fine detail brush. I feel like it holds the paint a little bit better and it keeps my point. Done with that base coat. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take my standard brush, my base coat brush. Where are you? There we go. And I am going to take some of the flesh wash. I think I'm going to do it with, I think we're going to go with the strong tone to start off. Now the washes, so you gotta shake them up. You gotta shake these up too, but they're a lot thinner. You can hear it. So strong tone. That blur. Go on, focus. There we go. I'm gonna put that on the dry palette. So this, the quick shade, the Army Painter quick shade stuff, washes. I'm still putting on the that palette because I don't know how it would work on the wet palette. I don't know if it would do weird things. I'm going to water it down just a tiny little bit. Keep my brush nice and wet. Just run the fingers. Is this too dark? That's the important question. Second question is that paint completely dry? I may jump the gun. If that's the case, dab a little bit of it off We're going to go back and highlight raised sections anyway, so as long as it gets into the knuckles, and so you can see, you know, parts of the hand and the curves of the hand, and we should be in all right shape. So we're going to be able to see his hand there. It's the best angle. The best angle so you can see that. Okay. It's all right. All set. With inks, again, the secret is to be pretty generous with it. You want it to be able to have enough fluidity to get into the cracks. You need to have enough of the ink to get into the corners and stuff and shade things. So you don't want to just let it coat it with a really thin layer, because then it won't run into the corners. And if it doesn't run into the corners, it doesn't achieve the goal of what you're trying to do anyway. If there's too much, dry the brush off just a little bit, and what it does is it'll draw it out into the bristles. Okay, gonna have to wait for those to dry a little. So I'm gonna move on to do the base coat for the pants and the other cloth, so the sleeves and the pant legs. Which one did I do? Is it this color? I think I started off with a darker one. I think it was this one. I think it was this one. Test. Was this my undercoat? Yes. And this is alien purple. I'm going to stick with the standard brush. Go with this guy. It's going to be a little bit for that to be set. So let's just get in here with our purple base coats. And I'm just going to not worry too much about it. I'm just going to get in there and get some foundation for other stuff. I'm off center. I'm not going to worry about if I get any purple on the boots, because I'll be painting those a slightly different color. This is just staging up the very, very light undercoat that I had done with the bone color and the dry brushing and everything. Because if I try and put a really dark purple on it, it's going to start to require lots of crazy coats, and it might soak through and just take more work than it really needs to. Again, try and make sure it's nice and smooth. I don't think I can reiterate that enough. The most important part is to make sure your paint goes on smoothly. Smooth paint saves a ton of time and trouble. Get the sleeves under the armor plates. This big honking shoulder pad. It's pretty good. I lighten it up though. I stage it up a bit. It works as a pretty good undercoat. I know it's probably really close to your favorite purple. At the moment it's going on thin enough to highlight itself, which is kind of funny. Now I'll be real careful towards the inner side because I don't really want to get it on the armor plate. I'm essentially done with the armor plate. I'm going to need a detail brush to get into that little tiny joint section. That's fine, we'll do that last. The only thing I wish with this wet palette was that the edges were lower. I'm essentially reaching over the lip of the container, trying not to bump it. Again, I'm not worried about the boots because I'll be painting those and putting a base coat on those next, so I'm trying to keep it toward the boot side because even if I get paint on that, it'll be covered. I'm trying to bend the bristles in such a way that they go underneath the armor plate, and that way it won't run up on top of it. I found that Army Painter actually makes wet palettes, but they want to charge you $17 for them. I was like, well, let's see what the benefits are. Awesome. Yeah, I would love to take a quick peek. The bristles go underneath the armor plate, all the way up against the edge. You can kind of push it in a little bit. It's a like Bob Ross. You know, he would say you could push with the tip of the brush, and you can kind of do that. Once you get it on, you can actually kind of give it a little shove in the other direction, and it'll bump into its edges. Especially if it's an upraised corner, and kind of just got to push the color into that nook as opposed to trying to spread it in there, because you'll end up hitting that plate on the top side if you try and spread it. So just kind of let it go. We'll find the right spot. Just be patient, that's all. I need that detail brush. Rinse off my standard brush. Make sure it's clean. Back over to my detail brush. Come on back in here. I gotta be careful because this right here is wet. That's my ink. I'm gonna put my hand in it before I'm done. I know it. Okay. Right. Down in here. I think I put this armor at a slightly different angle because the joint there is even smaller. But I got it more from underneath. So good. It's all good, but that'll be a good base. While I'm waiting for those to dry, I'm going to try and clean out some of my brushes some more, just to make sure I don't get any crud on them. Don't want the leftover paint getting into the bristles. This is an example, check this out. That's the first color I did. Still completely wet. Here's the second color I did. Still completely wet. If I need to go back in, I can mix it. It's ridiculous. I could take the lid, put it on that, come back tomorrow, work with the same colors. It's great. Absolutely love it. You know what? I'm going to try something. I'm going to take a bunch of this, dip this in there. I bet you that probably works. It just beads up. I'll probably still do it for that too. Yeah. Yep. This is almost dry right here. It's all drying around the edges. You can see it. But those are still completely wet. Okay. How does the skin look? I feel like that's okay. Man, I feel like I need to go back to these guys and do one moment. Ones I had already finished, or mostly finished. A little better. I lost a bunch of the detail on the face, so let's just fix that. I was doing this in kind of an assembly line because there are 12, so. All right, where's that detail brush again. Now I'm going to look for elf flesh. Or do I stick with the barbarian flesh? If I go back with the barbarian flesh a little bit, and then do an extreme highlight with the elf flesh, I think it'll look pretty good. Let's darken this hand up a little bit. Just along the back of the hand that's facing the sky. I'll lighten it up a touch. Edge of his face and the side of his neck. Kind of get some highlight in there. Leave the underside pretty shadowed. Do the same thing with this guy. Kind of get his chin and his jawline, top of his face. Come around this side where it was extra dark. There we go. The upraised portion of his neck. Okay. Back in and around his hand. Maybe this guy's got more of a tan than the other one does. I like to use the side of the bristles to kind of just get the upraised sections. If I can. Pick out a little bit, just corners and stuff with elven flesh because it's super pale, but I only need a very little bit of it. going to go in here and I'm going to hit like the point of his chin. And upper corner of his mouth. Needs to be a little bit better. If you water it down enough, it isn't quite a wash, but it acts almost like one, because it'll kind of blend in a little bit to the undercoat. See, that's way too bright. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my brush and keep it pretty damp. I'm going to try and pick it up. It's hard to see it, but it's way too bright right there. At some point this evening, I have to do my exercises. I have 2 days left, trying to do a 90-day stretch. The holidays were kind of rough because I got sick, so I took a break. So I'm on my snow days. I basically put them in there as like makeup days at the end of it. I'm nearly done. Pretty happy with it. That's better. All right, a little bit more. Water this down just a touch more. Just gonna go for like the ends of the finger. Coming along, coming along. All right, last guy. A little bit of skin tone. A little tiny bit of highlight. Kind of move it through. Give him some definition. It really makes the hands kind of stand out a bit better if you do it like this. You do a couple of different stages. Start seeing more detail. I'm almost dry brushing it across the top of his knuckles. That's all set. Should put on the next stage of the purple. I believe I brought it up. Did I do this one? Did I do this one? Thought I did more than one stage. I know I have a purple ink wash here that's really fantastic, and that's what I'll be doing afterward. So this one right here, they changed up their vocabulary, so I guess Drushi or Druki or whatever the hell you want to call it is Dark Elf. But the Dark Elf purple wash is pretty cool. Alright, next purple on board is going to be this guy right here. Slightly different shade. This one is the Army Painter War Paints Orc Blood. I don't know why they think Orc Blood is purple, but whatever. It's not my company. I had to pick one that wasn't going to be a copyright infringement, so. Spread it around a bit. All right. Going back in here to bring this up to that middle purple. Doing the same thing I did when I did the base coat for it, but now because I had the purple down there already, it's not going to be nearly as spotty. I guess the word that I'm looking for. And if I want, I can leave the deep cracks, you know, I can leave the deep cracks in the base purple because it was dark enough as it went in there that it covered pretty well. And again, I'm trying to make sure, I do my best not to hit the armor plates because we've already painted those and they're effectively done. And I'm going to be working on everything else. Pants, boots, all the fun stuff. Gotta make sure you get all the paint in the grundle. Or else your grundle just goes unpainted and it's just weird. You wouldn't think you'd see that very much, but whenever you knock down a player in Blood Bowl, you turn the player over, or at least you knock them down on the field, so you do. You see all the underside stuff. Moving on here, gotta be careful, don't want to bump into the plates. Again, just kind of give it a little push up by the top. Make sure you got it all covered. It's going to bring this purple up quite a bit. I don't think I ever mentioned why I painted them this color. So my old Dark Elf team is in pretty standard Dark Elf colors, mostly blacks with some purple clothing or some other purple bits here or there. And I thought that why do they have to be a dark color scheme even though they're called Dark Elves? And I was like, why not bone colored armor? Because that would look pretty cool. And the new models are super neat because they have these bits in the front, they're like a sea dragon cloak, which I think is fantastic, because they're essentially, as far as the game story goes, they're basically raiders. So they come across on these arcs, these big ships. They call them black arcs, and they raid coastal encampments and then go back up to the north. They're kind of like, I don't know, fantasy Viking elves. They're here to steal all your stuff. Yeah, that's getting to be the right color. But I was like, you know what? I want them to be a lighter color scheme. And I started playing around with it. And that's why I'm bringing the purple, even though it's a darker color. It's I'm bringing it to a really, really light purple, fuchsia almost. Before I do the wash, the highlight color is like crazy pink. And then when you do the purple wash to it, it blends it together so that it all kind of fits in. It looks really nice. And again, the places where it doesn't coat or it runs off a ridge and looks kind of bright, that's fine, because that's essentially the place I'm going to highlight. So I'm not too worried about getting that like completely covered. All I really want to do is make sure, again, the important part is not to get a bunch of paint on the armor plates. Did I forget to do that? I did. I suck. I suck. It's alright. The paint is still wet. Thanks to the paint wet palette, which is great. I love it. Careful, careful. There you go. How did I skip that? You guys are supposed to point it out when I miss something. Nah, not like you can necessarily see it. I need to let that dry for a second. So I'm probably not going to finish these guys tonight, but that means I have part 2 next week. So tonight so far has been dry brushing, and 2-stage dry brushing, 2-stage cloth work, the base coat on the skin, the wash, and then the double highlight to bring the tones up. These guys I still need to start doing metal on, so I haven't done metal on the team yet, but we'll get through. So eventually they all have gray boots. You can see the difference in these guys right here. They'll eventually have these gray boots, which look pretty cool. I figure they probably have shark skin as leather. We'll get the green done. I'll move along that way. How are you done? You're good. That's not quite dry yet. I need to let that sit for a second longer. Wow. Does anybody have any questions? Anything you find that looks weird or anything I didn't explain? Feel free to ask it. Feel free to just pop on through, you know? Yeah. I got dragon scale and shark skin. Shark skin leather, dragon scale protective cloaks. Yep, I think that'll work. I'm trying to decide if I want to do the masks in a different color, if I want to make them like the mask bit on the helmet here. If I want to make this bit bronze, like all the way down in front of his face, I don't know if it'll make too much of a difference. Pay no attention to the bases. I wanted to put black in like a prelim around the bases, because when I was looking at it like this, it just seemed kind of plain. I wanted to see how much of a difference it was going to make with the darker base, so I can actually differentiate where the feet are and stuff like that. The bases will be flocked on the entire team, but so yeah, 2 boxes if you want 4 blitzers on a Dark Elf team. And I mean, who doesn't? Dark Elf Blitzers are fantastic. They are absolutely worth the player price to put in. If you can't get all 4 of them right away, because you're trying to do rerolls, which is also important, or fan factor, which is also important if you're in a league. If you can't get 4, get 2 or 3, and then pick that 4th one up as soon as you hit 100 grand? I think it's 100,000 gold to buy a Blitzer, Dark Elf Blitzer. But they're awesome. They're fantastic. They're basically a human Blitzer, but with a 4 agility, which means they can also ball handle really well. Oh, yeah, absolutely, Quap. The wet palette, this guy right here, okay? What the wet palette does is it does pretty much what it says. The flesh tone and the bone and the white were the first thing I did at 8:30, and it is still wet. I can go in and I can just dab my paintbrush in it, and continue to paint with it as if I just watered it down, took it out of the box, out of the pot. When you put the paint on here, what happens is it dries out real fast, because they're water-based acrylics. So as soon as you start getting it down there, it just begins to evaporate. The water dries out. The wet palette is, see, all of this is all dry already. I put a little bit down here. So the wet palette is parchment paper on top of a couple layers of paper towel. You fold them up enough to hold some water. You stuff the paper towel down in there so it's nice and flat. And then you take the parchment paper and you stuff it down in there, and usually it's curled. So you push it in so that the curled side would be facing down, because when you jam it in, it tends to stay, as opposed to if you do it the other way, it curls up on itself. And what happens is the parchment paper is partially porous, so there's a little bit of moisture underneath it, and it sort of gets sucked up into the paint as the water in the top evaporates. So it keeps it from drying out. And the nice thing about it is, with a little Tupperware lid like this, you can just put the top on it. And if I came back to it tomorrow, the paint is still wet, and it's still usable, and I can just go right back to it. It's great, and it's super cheap. You don't have to spend a ton of money on it. You don't. Pretty much everybody has some paper towels and a sandwich Tupperware container or Gladware container or something like that around. It's awesome. It's absolutely awesome. Yeah, I just started using it this week. I started trying some stuff on like Monday or Tuesday, and I literally had to swap out the parchment paper because the paint was still wet. I hadn't used all of it, although I had been using like all of the paint that was in there. I've ended up using all of it so that it was almost gone, because it doesn't really stick to the parchment paper as much as it sticks to this. Like, this is all tacky and hard to get off. But all I need is a little bit of parchment paper. If you get a roll of parchment paper, you cut it to the right size, you drop it in, you press it down to the edges. It kind of wrinkles a little bit, but it's just a little bit, it's not moist, but it almost feels like it. It's cool. Yeah, the paint's great. The paint will sit there, and it'll separate a little bit, so all I gotta do is mix it up with the bristles, but it's fine to go the next day, or the day after that, or the day after that. I wouldn't be surprised if I could open this up next week and still use these. So yeah, it's fun. I finished? Okay. I'm gonna go back. Speaking of which, if I had left it on my dry palette, this purple would be unusable right now. I'd have to water it down and do all sorts of stuff with it. But it is ready to go directly off the wet palette. After talking about it for 5 minutes, it's dry on the miniature, still wet on the palette. It's great, love it. And it helps because it keeps the paint wet. It helps it go on more smooth. You don't ever have to really worry about it getting chunky while it's on it. So you never have the old toothpaste effect. Properly hydrated paint means your bristles don't get all tacky and nasty. Makes them easier to clean. And it's just all around good stuff. And I sadly forget who told me about this last week, or at least who said, "Hey, have you tried using a wet palette?" And I was like, "No." So I looked up the next day. I was like, "That's amazing." Learn something new every darn day. I'm very pleased that I started painting in front of people-ish online, because I would have never really tried that. And I would have wasted a bunch more paint. Alright, there we go. Brighten it up. Brighten it up a little bit. Alright, let's get in, which was the dark gray that I used. I think I just did uniform gray. Painter uniform gray. A little bit on the wet palette. Paint scab. Pick off paint scab. Get off of the bottle. There we go. All right. These are basically going to be for the boots and the underside of the scaly bits. I probably should use I could probably do this with my large brush, so long as the bristles are staying true. Water down just a little bit more on the actual palette itself. All right. So we're looking at the boots. Now I want to be careful, because I had said that I was happy to paint over the boots with the purple as I was doing the pants, but now it's in the other direction, so I got to be a little bit more careful around the corners. shaped up. There we go. Again, if you can, try and draw the bristles to you in most cases. If you can draw it toward you, you get a little more control. Sometimes it's really hard to see where you're going to be, though. Gotta kind of trust your instincts a little bit. Sometimes some of these places can be almost blind corners. Tuck him under his foot to get to the other foot. Okay. Bring these bristles up. I think what gets most people when they start off is they expect to be able to feel the resistance on the head of the brush. And you really can't if you're doing it right. Nice and gentle. It's not like you're painting on canvas. You're not using a heavy brush and a lot of paint. You're using a really little brush and very little paint. You're just looking to leave it on the surface as you're going past. Basically taken care of. I think I mentioned this last time, but I think really when it comes down to it, the difference in experience is more about how often you can get away with a larger brush. And so like I've got a large brush right now, and I'm going in and I'm picking out the spots on the calves and everything between all the buckles and all the other little nitty spots, but it's because I've got practice and I kind of know how this brush works. That's all. Just a matter of practice. As long as your brushes are good and you keep them clean, the points on the ends stay pretty sharp. And then you get to the point where you're like, the larger brushes are cool because they just hold more paint, so it lets you get in there longer. There we go. I'm not going to worry about the diamond shaped stud that's on the leather bit because I'm going to paint that later. So I know that's a higher surface point, so I don't have to worry about painting over it because I'll get to that point later on. Let me get a little tip so I can get under here. Okay. I forget, did I do under? Yeah, I did the straps. I believe there were other leather straps someplace. What was I looking at? Oh no, those are on the runners. back side of the Sea Dragon cloak, cape, armor bit, Sea Dragon thing, sash, perhaps. Is it really that important? No. I'm going to get down the bottom part. So I'll go back and get those bits with some of the green that I'll be using. But I want to make sure that the underside is the correct color. Next. All right, where did I start? Over here. And all you gotta do is be careful as you're coming through. Don't worry about the little brass stud looking thingy, because we'll be going back to get that part later. Alright, coming up here. Oh, something else I probably haven't gone over too much. Some people like to use a model grip. I know I've seen some Games Workshop is selling them now. They're basically like a handle with a clamp at the top. They're pretty cool. If you're ever worried about like accidentally crushing or dropping or doing whatever to the miniature, those things are pretty nifty. If you don't want to spend money on it, the way to make them is with a cork. Take a little bit of blue tack or something along those lines, a little bit of glue or something, just top it to the, pop it to the top, and you've got yourself a handle. So you can basically just, manipulate it from down here. It's kind of like a cheap and easy way to do it, sort of like this wet palette. All right, where is that corner bit? There we go. Go up if you're still in the chat. You still thinking about getting your Star Wars figures painted, or was the price too high? I am happy to take a peek. Do the first ones, see how they turn out, see how difficult they are. We can adjust from there. Did you get a chance to count them up, see how many you actually had to work with? Nice. are you doing tonight, Mrs. Guap? If you are watching, I appreciate it. Appreciate the view. Hopefully you find it interesting. Again, my goal is to channel the spirit of Bob Ross and be chill and just have some nice painting time. Possibly helping folks out, teaching them a couple of tips here or there. Yeah, definitely. Give it a whirl. Again, the most important part when it comes to painting is not to rush, and don't worry if you get paint on a different part of the figure, because you can always fix it later. Yeah. And I mean, Stormtroopers should be pretty quick. I mean, realistically, Stormtroopers could possibly even be a less expensive batch than what I had mentioned. I made a Facebook post on the general costs for painting and stuff like that, and man, I was thinking about how to paint the Stormtroopers, and I don't know, I think I might just realistically paint them white, like do a full-on white base coat, and then maybe go in with a couple of passes of the darkest wash I got, to keep it really, really dark, get it almost black. Because even if it gets a little bit in the grooves, yeah. Oh, check this out. So I got the entire other lance done. Yeah, I definitely prime them, depending on what color you're working with. These guys I primed this color, this sort of bone color, and then I went over a couple layers of dry brushing, and it gave me sort of a good base. The color scheme makes a big difference. I used to always prime them black, but in the past, I don't know, 20 years or so, I've changed it up. If you can get away with it, sometimes you can do, like if you're doing skeletons and you prime them all in the bone color, and then you do kind of a shade wash to them, they're almost done. Once that's finished, you go over your dry brush, you do a little bit of highlight, you pick out some details if they're carrying weapons or things like that, and then you're set. You just flock the bases and you run with it. I don't know if you can see it, but I'm definitely covered in paint. Again. Alright, what else did I want to do? Oh, did I not get the backside of that? I did get the backside of that. I'm done. Hey, Sif, what's up? What's up, kid? What you doing? You can't paint. You don't have thumbs. What? Do you want to say hi? Is that what you want to do? doing? Come say hello. Come say hi. Say hi to everybody. They're right over there, the blue one. You see the blue? No, you don't see the blue. You want to step on things? There you go. Alright. Grays are done. What I end up doing is I also end up doing a dark wash across the grays as well. Picks out some of the details, and then I'll highlight it again with the same color because the dark wash brings that gray down to a darker, a very much darker color, and I'll go back and do the highlights on it. Hit that in just a second. I do believe... What? What did I use? What did I use? Scaly and then a wash? I think it was scaly green. I think if you did a camo job on the Stormtroopers, it would look pretty cool. Not gonna lie. Is that too light? Might be too light. What color was this? What color did I do that in? Nope. Nope. Oh, did I do Wizard Orb? Hold on. Yep. Alright, it's highlighted in scaly green, but it's base coated in Wizard Orb. Another nice thing about the wet palette, I put the highlight color down first, but I don't have to worry about it because it's gonna stay wet. Alright, Wizard Orb, little tiny bit. Scale green can go away. Let's get this brush. Mix in a little bit of water, make sure it stays nice and damp. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna get inside here. I'm just gonna coat these entirely. There are like horns and stuff on them, horns and claws and whatnot, and I'll get those in the last step on the details phase. And again, because I'm doing that on the last part, I'm not worried too much about painting over them right now, because I will get back to it. Here, do it nice and close. Because I also like to do a little bit of a wash on this because it helps get inside, get into all the cracks. Shades it up a little bit, picks out some of the detail. When I'm doing the corner of this bit, I'm not super worried, because there's a bunch of metal spiky parts that I will again be getting back to afterward, and if I get a little bit on them, that's fine. Getting in here is a little trickier because I don't really want to get it on the helmet, so I gotta be a little more careful. As I get his evil villain collar. Close. the bristles up under the armor plate a little bit because it overlaps it slightly. There's a little bit of a gap. And again, it's one of those things where you can kind of do a little bit of a push. You put it on, then you push it a little bit. Kind of like tuck them in. Once you tuck the bristles in, it's all set. There. Get up there. Don't want to hit his face. Do want to get inside the edge of it. All right. And behind the helmet. It's hard to see down there. Another thing about priming is a lot of time, because it's a water-based acrylic, if you're putting it on a plastic model, it won't necessarily stick. So you don't want it to run off and get all pooled in weird places and be nasty looking. There we go. Not too bad, they're coming along. Couple of washes, couple of bits of highlight, and this guy will be that guy, and they'll be pretty much exactly the same. But at the moment, that makes me feel like I've at least got 4 blitzers that I can put on the table. So that's always good. Yeah, not bad, not bad. Is this dry enough? Yeah. Gonna take a little bit of the dark tone. Like my favorite dark tone. Clean them? It depends. It depends on the miniature. You're talking like flashing and lines and sprue stuff, that kind of stuff sticking out, Joe? It's sort of, I mean, you get it a little bit, but it's not that big of a deal. And the GW figures have started getting better and better about it. Like a lot of the armor plates and whatnot have their sprue attachment points on the backside, so that like when you clip it off, after you've clipped it, it's not actually something that's visible. It just kind of gets buried underneath the connection point, so it sort of gets glued in. These are all plastic. It doesn't happen with plastic minis. Plastic minis do not have all of that weird chemical stuff. So I'm just being generous with the wash, because I want it to have enough to be able to get into the cracks, and I'm doing it just along the top of the boot so that it defines the different spot between the top of the boot and the pants. You can be pretty free with it. It's just going to shade spots that you want to highlight for later anyhow. Yeah, it looks good. Let's get it up behind the sash. Get the belts that are up on his arm. Straps for the arm piece. All right, grab the next guy. Same deal. Generously apply a wash around all the corners. And what it's going to do is it's going to pick out the details for me a little bit. If I put enough on, it should wash into the cracks and look real nice. If you don't put enough ink wash on it, it actually just kind of spreads and darkens whatever color you're working on and doesn't necessarily get details. If you put too much, you go in and you dab it with the tip of the brush and it'll take that away. There we go. That looks good. Get the back of the sash. Put it over the sea dragon sash as well, because that'll look real good. Yeah. Thanks. Have a lovely night. Rest well. And we'll see you next week. Just going to finish this one up here. And I will be signing off. Alright. Again, they need a little bit more detail work. I will absolutely do so. But now, I'm going to put my finger right in the ink, of course. There we go. 4 blitzers. I'll get the metal work and the detail stuff done later, but that's pretty easy because it's just painting on metal bits. There we go. Yeah, right there, right there. Every time I put it down, right in the ink. So, thanks for stopping by. Dark Elf Blitzers for Blood Bowl. Pretty much 90% done. Maybe I'll do a part next week where I start picking out the details on the rest of the team. But yeah, there we go. Have a fantastic evening. I hope you guys learned some stuff about wet palettes. I certainly did when I figured this stuff out. I'm going to put the lid on that and save that till I start painting again tomorrow. Be safe, be healthy, and I will see you next week.